Hey everybody, John Greenwald here with theblackvault.com. I'm here to talk to you about flares. No, I'm just kidding. We've done enough of that ridiculousness on this channel, and it is still a fiery hot topic out there in social media land. We should be done with it. We should move on, but people are doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on that topic. Whatever, let them duke it out. But I'm here to talk to you about something different. Now, a couple weeks ago, I posted some documents I've been meaning to make a video for this channel about, and thankfully I didn't have time. I got a little bit sidetracked with my normal work that has nothing to do with the Black Vault, and then obviously this week with the new 29 Palms UAP story, which is just a complete mess. But the documents were all about the formation of the AOIMSG, or AIMSG as they referenced the acronym, and that was the making sure I have the acronym right, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. And what these documents were that I posted a couple weeks ago were public affairs documents, namely briefing cards and a few other things. Now, briefing cards are pretty neat, simply because they hold all of the information that, number one, is public, but number two is there for them to be prepared for when journalists who are doing their job are asking important questions. And so they're fun to get your hands on because essentially you see everything that they can talk about. But if they're not asked the question, they don't sit there and read the document to the newscasters and journalists during press conferences and so on, but rather they're there just as preparation. So if nobody asks the question, you don't get the information. Somebody asks the question, well, then they're prepared for it. So that's why these briefing cards are really important. In the past, I've received them on the UAP task force, on ATIP, on UAP in general. They dealt with questions on all of the aforementioned, including Luis Elizondo, how they handled that. If you haven't seen them before, I'll link those older ones in the show notes below. So when I got my hands on these for AIMSG, even though AIMSG has moved on and now we're at Aero and it's a different effort, again, it gives these kind of inside looks into the documents themselves. So let me bring up the article that I posted a couple of weeks ago. And this was the article. I'm not going to read it all to you, but you can see kind of how they look internally. These are internal documents again, obtained then later by me through the Freedom of Information Act. You can see the date back in December of 2021. The interesting one, and this will come into play here in a few minutes when I talk about the newest stuff, but this one I didn't know when I wrote this would later become important. Number one, it does deal with extraterrestrial technology and a question about that. That's something you kind of rarely see addressed. And so even though you're not going to like the answer, and I will read the answer to you, you won't like the answer per se, it is interesting to at least see them deal with the topic itself. The question in this document, again, preparing any public affairs official, has the department found any evidence of extraterrestrial technology? The answer prepared is the examinations into incursions by UAPs are still ongoing. We lack sufficient information in our data set to attribute incidents to specific explanations. It is not the purpose of the AIMSG to look for evidence of extraterrestrials. Other parts of the government do that. For example, NASA looks for evidence of life on other planets. Well, they kind of took a left turn there and really didn't answer the question at all. But sadly, that's what they do. They're spin artists. These are Department of Defense professionals that are there to essentially spin the story. And it doesn't matter if it's on UFOs or anything else. We can all come to some kind of a consensus there. Their effort is to spin. So that's what they do. So these documents essentially will help them spin. And you can see there they kind of derailed what could be a good conversation about evidence and what the DoD has or doesn't have when it comes to that kind of evidence to prove or disprove extraterrestrials, but rather than just kind of forwarded it and directed everybody to NASA. It doesn't matter if the DoD's aim is to look for evidence of extraterrestrials or AIMSG specifically. That doesn't matter. If they're doing a scientific effort and there is a possibility and quite possibly evidence to support extraterrestrial evidence and in existence, then it doesn't matter if that was the aim. Their aim is to get to the bottom of what this mystery is. So that's why those answers are just kind of so funky to read sometimes, but it does give you some insight about how they handle these topics. Some of the other things, top line messages and talking points, we've heard a lot of this before, and you'll see written statements in news articles about UAP and AOIMSG or AIMSOG and ARROW and all of these topics. You see a lot of these parroted over and over and over. So sometimes it's not just for a spokesperson standing at a podium, but rather those spokespeople that are behind the scenes, so to speak. They're not necessarily on camera, but they're answering people like me, other journalists, and reporters out there that are asking the Pentagon question. So you see these types of statements all the time. One of the other big things that came out of these documents was essentially solidifying this particular individual that I had written about back in September of 2022. His name was Matthew Cummings. He was a senior advisor within the Office of Secretary of Defense, which is where I first discovered kind of what I believed was a connection to UAP. And these released documents solidified that he was the acting director of AIMSOG. You can see here, too, from the documents, we haven't announced this publicly. Now, these were a way, now I'm kind of getting away for a little bit from the briefing cards, but I just wanted to give you an idea. There are other documents as well within this specific release that really do add pieces to the puzzle. So it solidified that Matthew Cummings was the acting director of AIMSOG at the time that it was written. And you can see here written, I've been in discussion with OUSDI and S for some time that once the implementing guidance is published, we need to hold a backgrounder for the media. The backgrounder essentially going over what they're doing with UAP, what AIMSOG was all about, so on and so forth. So far, OUSDI and S has agreed to that. Not that Matt is thrilled, as he'd be the key senior defense official, as they all recognize this is needed to further our efforts to normalize, standardize, and destigmatize reporting on UAP/airborne objects in military airspace. And it goes on from there. So essentially, it gives you, number one, a confirmation about who this individual was, because I saw his name prior, just wasn't able to connect to what his exact role was. This solidified that, but on top of it, showed his mindset, that he just wasn't thrilled to have to start answering questions to the media. So great stuff in the release. Again, different pieces of the puzzle in different ways. Here, let me just kind of scrub through. You'll see a PDF there with over 30 pages worth of material on various angles to what I had requested. So I invite you all to click on that link below. You'll see the briefing cards, and you'll see all this other material as well. Now, let me switch gears. Let me get to the stuff that came this week. And this is the article I wrote yesterday, as a lot of people were still duking it out about the flares and that whole mess. I got this release, which I found was fascinating, because what I had requested was, again, I won't go over all the nitty gritty details, but I dig in every angle on trying to get all of these specific documents. And in this particular request, it yielded another copy of the briefing card that I just went over for you from December of 2021. Now, December 9th to be exact. But this one was a little bit different. At first glance, at quick glance, you think, oh, it's just the same document. But then I realized there were redactions in it, which were not in the previous release I got a couple of weeks ago, which that was a red flag to me. Generally, when you have stuff dated the exact same, headed the same way, they're the same. But obviously, we had something a little bit different. Looking a little bit closer, I realized that there were much more redactions, including a section that was not for release. In my experience, and it's limited, don't get me wrong, I'm not any claim to be an expert here on briefing cards, but generally the briefing cards that I've received in the past, they don't have that kind of stuff. It's all the material that they want to give to the public if asked. So again, they don't distribute these documents, but rather it's information that is unclassified that they can give out. Now, the exemption here was not stating that the information was redacted because it was classified. These were still unclassified documents. But essentially, they used what we call the exempted if you want to, which is a B5, the exempted if you want to exemption. So we hate it because it's very hard to fight. I fought it anyway, so I'll get to that in a moment. But regardless, they exempted under exemption B5. Their exact quote on why they use it is that the information is inter and intra-agency memoranda, which are deliberative in nature. So again, not getting into the nitty-gritty of the legal definition of that. Essentially, if they are talking about something but trying to determine the best course of action, if it's deliberative in nature, that they will go ahead and exempt it. That is not the legal definition, but it's kind of like the easiest way to quickly explain it. So that's where it becomes the exempted if you want to, because how do you fight that? How do you prove it? How do you say, hey, wait a minute, that's not exactly what this is? Where in contrast, you look at national security information, maybe you can place an argument if it was classified 40 years ago. There's an argument there. So you have these set ways to tackle exemptions. B5 is incredibly difficult. But regardless, this is what I just went over with you guys. Again, this was the left side of this was the briefing card I just went over. These aren't questions I explained in this particular video, but regardless, this is the same section. Now, what's interesting is this was the one that was released a couple weeks ago. The one that was released this week seemingly has this entire question blacked out under B5. The question is why? Because they already released it if it is the same here. So if asked about AOIMSG / AOIMEXEC, that's the executive council or whatever it is. The Airborne Object Identification and Management Executive Council. They're the ones that looked over AIMSOG. So if asked about those prior to publishing of implementing guidance, and then there is a answer there. As directed by Deputy Secretary Hicks in her memo, we're currently transitioning the UAP task force and its ongoing efforts to the AIMSOG. We're also working on additional implementing guidance in the AIMSOG as well as the Airborne Object Identification and Management Executive Council for Deputy Secretary Hicks approval per her memo. Once that guidance is approved and published, the transition from UAPTF is AIMSOG is complete. I think they mean to AIMSOG is complete. And the AOIM exec has had its first meeting. We'll be happy to answer your questions about either more fully. So I don't see that as deliberative in nature, so I'm not really sure. So the question stands, is this the same and it was a mistake to redact it? Maybe a different officer, who knows? But obviously that's different. The more intriguing one came after the extraterrestrial technology question that I did go over in this video. But contrary to the previous release, look what's here. Additional background information, not for release. There's two ways to look at this. Either are plausible. Number one, this has absolutely nothing to do with this specific question. It's just a different headline about background information on UAP or AIMSOG or both. They didn't want to release it, not sure why, and that's what this information is. Or it's a header to go along with this question. Here's what we want to give to the public. Here's some additional background information, not for release, on the idea about evidence for extraterrestrial technology. Either are on the table. I really don't have an answer for you. I have a guess, and this is just a guess and opinion. This is maybe not related at all. I would lean towards that this is just a different section. But it doesn't matter what the right answer is. If it's related to extraterrestrial technology question above or not, what don't they want us to know? Because keep in mind, this is a unclassified document. So some might come around and say, well, John, they're talking about sensors and this and that and details about it. Okay, that's all great. This is an unclassified document, so they would not be talking about it. So what background information do they not want the public to know? That's my big question. So what I did was file the appeal, as you can imagine, fighting all of those redactions. And I want you to click on the link below and download this as well, because you can see it in its entirety. I've got all the documents there. There were 2 briefing cards released. The one that I went over was the more interesting of the 2. But regardless, appealed it, going after that information to get those redactions lifted. Because, again, it's an unclassified document. And in my argument, the public interest in this will far outweigh the quote-unquote deliberative nature that they want to argue. So I made it much more in-depth than that in this appeal, cited some case law to make it hopefully make more sense to their attorneys and legal people. But other than that, let's see where we end up. But kind of a fun little find. I'm always, as I say in this channel, interested in your thoughts and ideas. Right here on YouTube, you can place your comment below, and I appreciate you doing so. If you see this video anywhere else, do the same. Always a thumbs up or like or share. Whatever platform you're watching this on is truly a big help to help spread the word and have others find the video as well. Thank you again for listening and watching. My name is John Greenwald Jr., and I'm signing off. I'll see you next time.